This conference will now be recorded.
Welcome, everyone. My name is David Myers. I'm the Executive Director of the Conservation Finance Alliance. And on behalf of the CFA's Marine and Coastal Finance Working Group, which is a new working group that is focused on marine and coastal finance issues, we are very happy to be hosting Angelique Pouponneau, who's the CEO of the Seychelles Conservation and Climate Adaptation Trust, or SeyCCAT. And SeyCCAT is in a really interesting position. And of course, the Seychelles have been a leader in certain aspects of conservation finance. And we're very, very excited to have Angelique present some of these issues to us today. We'll have a presentation followed by a period of question and answer. And for that, we're going to ask you to type your questions into the chat box, and what we'll do is we'll go from sort of the top to the bottom and call on people. If you're able to unmute your microphone, you can then ask your question directly, so we can have more of a conversation going. And please, if you're listening to the presentation, mute your microphones so that there's as little background noise as possible. And we look forward to the presentation. And please, if you're not already a member of the CFA, please join the CFA. If you're interested in marine and coastal finance issues, please join the new Marine and Coastal Finance Working Group. And we hope to be providing a range of webinars going forward. So if you're on the mailing list, you'll be notified of those upcoming webinars. So with that introduction done, I'm very pleased to introduce Angelique, and look forward to a really interesting discussion after the presentation. Thanks. Angelique, over to you.
Thank you very much, David. Good morning, everyone, or depending where you are, good afternoon, and definitely good evening from the Seychelles. So my name is Angelique Pouponneau, as introduced. I am the CEO of SeyCCAT, and I recently started in February of last year. So a lot of the transaction predates me, but I will take you on the journey that the Seychelles embarked on as far back as 2012. So I think just for some context, before I move into the substance of the presentation, is really to appreciate the specificities of the Seychelles. So we are a small island developing state in the middle of, well, in the middle of the ocean, but in the Western Indian Ocean, to be specific. We sit about between 4 to 7 degrees south of the equator, off the east coast of Africa. So the Seychelles, being a small island developing state, but always very mindful that despite being small in landmass, we have a huge exclusive economic zone. Here we're talking about approximately 1.35 million square kilometers of ocean. So as expected, being a small island developing state and having such a large EEZ, we are very much dependent on two main sources of income: tourism as well as fisheries. And then of course we have other smaller sectors of our economy. So and as you can imagine, right now very hard hit by the impact of COVID-19. But I think if we go back to thinking to the debt for nature swap, the three high priorities for the government, and I think that remains the case today because of the circumstances that we're in, is first of all the fact that as a small island, we are very much dependent on importation, placing significant pressures on our reserves. We welcome every year, well, since before this year, we welcome every year 300,000 people to our shores. That is 3 times more than our local population. So in view of these circumstances, we also are a very small population. So of course, funding capital projects are often very have a heavy burden on each individual in terms of the tax base. But so we are very much dependent on cooperation, including debt, including receiving loans from external creditors, and as such, we have high external debt. So that was a critical concern, especially in 2014, having experienced the global economic crisis in 2008 and having to work to succumb over that. So the other aspect that's particularly important for the Seychelles, of course, is climate change. Being a small island developing state, many of our islands are at sea level or very low lying. As such, there are several threats to the islands, including marine ecosystems facing, ocean acidification, bleaching of our corals, the threat of sea level rise when it comes to coastal erosion, especially erosion of our critical infrastructure. Just to put things into perspective, about 80% of our infrastructure, meaning roads as well as residential, as well as economic activities, are based along the coast. So of course, continues to present significant vulnerability of the Seychelles. But finally, we also have this huge potential, and that is our 1.35 million square kilometer EEZ. And in that respect, the Seychelles becomes this ideal case for a debt for nature swap. So now I'm going to go a little into the transactions themselves. All right. I hope my screen has changed. So I will speak to the Seychelles experience and then zoom in onto SeyCCAT's role. And I will distinguish it as much as possible as when I say, the Seychelles, and then versus when I say SeyCCAT. So the Seychelles government, given these 3 very high priorities for them as well as the country, they were approached by a US-based philanthropic organization to consider implementing a debt for nature swap. So the one aspect of this debt for nature swap that would be very different or unique was the fact that it was going to be linked to ocean conservation. So the US-based philanthropic organization in this case is the Nature Conservancy. So when they approached the government of Seychelles, the government went on to negotiate with their external creditors at the Paris Club. And here we're thinking about 5 countries initially. I believe it was the United Kingdom, France, Italy, Belgium, and initially South Africa. And the idea was that the government of Seychelles would buy back its debt from those creditors, and it would be at a discount. I know there's been many articles out there after we had our big celebration last week, and I'll talk about that shortly, that the sort of the secret sauce to all of this, as Rob Weary would say, is the fact that you can actually buy debt at a discount. And here the opportunity arose in order to be able to buy back debt from these then 5, now 4, well, then 5, and then it became 4 countries. So in order to buy back the debt, as a small island developing state, we don't have sort of millions of US dollars lying about to buy back our debt. Otherwise, we wouldn't be so in such a position. So the Nature Conservancy partnered with the government to mobilize these resources. And Of course, many of you would have heard of the various partners that came on board to assist in this mobilization of funds, from the Wait Foundation, Leonardo DiCaprio's foundation, and many others. So here, if we look specifically at the transaction itself, it would enable the government of Seychelles to buy back its debt, and then they would have certain obligations. But I want us to focus on sort of the movement, of money at this point. So we've got the Nature Conservancy, and I'm not sure if my mouse is showing you the Nature Conservancy, but it's at the top. And here they would provide an impact loan and a grant. So the impact loan would be 15.2 million and a grant of $5 million US. And they would essentially need to get this to the government of Seychelles in order for them to purchase back their debt from the Paris Club. You will see at the top the transaction between the government of Seychelles and the Paris Club, that the debt purchase amount is 20.2 million US dollars, but when it comes back to the government of Seychelles, it's 21.6 million US dollars. And this is very much the discount that Rob Weary speaks of. So the debt was what at a discount. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that it was 93 cents to a dollar. So here, but the problem is, there's this issue where the Nature Conservancy needs to get these funds to the Seychelles for it to be able to buy back its debt. However, under US-based charity laws, this US charity cannot give money directly to a government. So what is required here is a non-governmental organization to be able to essentially facilitate this transaction. So this is where SeyCCAT comes in. The Seychelles Conservation and Climate Adaptation Trust. It was initiated, and its origins is as a public-private partnership where the government of Seychelles and the Nature Conservancy decided that they would create a non-governmental body that would then become independent and autonomous, with its own board that would direct its affairs. So then this is where sort of the birth of the Seychelles Conservation and Climate Adaptation Trust, and we now see it being introduced into the financial transaction. So the Nature Conservancy could now loan the funds to SeyCCAT. The funds are moved from the Nature Conservancy to SeyCCAT. SeyCCAT then on loans it to the government of Seychelles. They purchase back their debt, and then the government of Seychelles pays back SeyCCAT over a period of 20 years. Okay? So that's essentially the transaction. I'm sure I can clarify later on during discussions if there are any questions, but essentially it is the purchasing back of debt from the Paris Club using funds that the Nature Conservancy had mobilized, and SeyCCAT is essentially the special purpose vehicle that can enable this to happen. However, in order to embark on this debt for nature swap, there were certain conditions to the deal. So one of them was that the government of Seychelles would protect 30% of its exclusive economic zone. So this is what we celebrated last week. I think it was last week. I've lost track of days. So it was on the 26th of March where the government had designated 30% of its EEZ as marine protection areas. And this was in line with this transaction, and this was one of the commitments that they had undertaken in order to do the debt for nature swap. But in addition to that, another commitment was to use the funds, well, some of the funds, towards a ocean conservation and climate adaptation projects. And here at the bottom of the screen, one of the boxes, sort of bordered in red, shows you the Blue Grants Fund. And here you very much have this recurring fund of monies of proceeds coming from the debt for nature swap, in addition to funds from proceeds from another transaction that we'll talk about shortly. But you have monies coming here, which will be used towards Seychelles ideas and initiatives and projects, and I will speak to what types of projects we fund and the impact that we've had so far in a couple of slides down. In order to also make this a long-term endeavor, we also have a blue endowment fund, and here we invest a proportion of the loan repayment in an endowment which will mature in 2036. So here again, thinking long term and thinking of that element of future generations, and that is invested in an endowment. So this is our first and original transaction that begins the life of SeyCCAT. But then we start to evolve, and I say that because we have a competitive advantage now in the ecosystem, in the conservation financing ecosystem in Seychelles. The competitive advantage is we are a independent organization, non-governmental. We have now a experience in reporting to donors. We are very transparent. All our audited accounts are on our website, very transparent, and we start to become an attractive proposition in the landscape. So this is when the government of Seychelles starts to think of its next innovative financing scheme, the Seychelles Blue Bond, which you can see on one side of the screen. It starts to think about the role of SeyCCAT in the transaction that the mechanism it was working on. So if we move now to the blue bond, and I'll tell you in total how much we get annually from both transactions in a moment. But the government of Seychelles in 2008 issued this blue bond, a sovereign blue bond, so like a bond issued by a bank. This one is issued by the government of Seychelles. The investors are 3 US-based investors, impact investors, including Calvert Impact Capital, Nuveen, and Prudential. And here they invest $15 million US into this bond. I think it's worth saying, and a lot of people ask about, what attracts investors into these types of transactions. And one of the things that stands out is the fact that one, it was very specific, right? So the proceeds of this bond had to be used towards transitioning the Seychelles to sustainable fisheries, and particularly focusing on the demersal fishery and artisanal fishery as a whole. So this was very, very important. It had a clear objective. But in addition to that, there were some mechanisms to de-risk the transaction. So we have a partial guarantee from the World Bank, and in addition to that, a concessionary loan from the GEF, the Global Environment Facility. So this mechanism, if you like, is also supported by the Swiofish 3 project, so the Southern Western Indian Ocean Fisheries Project, that is also supported by the World Bank. So these are further assistance that is provided towards the implementation or the successful implementation of the bond. So where does the money go? $15 million US, a bond issued by the government of Seychelles. And where does SeyCCAT fit in? So SeyCCAT is given the opportunity to administer $3 million US of the 15, right? And remember, perhaps I haven't mentioned this, but we provide grants through the Blue Grants Fund, right? So $3 million of the $15 million US will go towards grants financing, again, of Seychellois initiatives that will transition us to sustainable fisheries. And 12 million goes to the Blue Investment Fund. And this is another fund that is administered by the Development Bank of Seychelles. It's obviously more significant with 12 million US to manage. But here they provide blue loans, right? So they have a revolving fund, and they provide loans to local investors or PPPs that undertake initiatives within the Seychelles. So many people ask, so what's the link between the Blue Investment Fund and the Blue Grants Fund? So the idea is that one would come to SeyCCAT from the Blue Grants Fund to get a grant to test your ideas, to undertake research and development, to de-risk, and then to come out of it with sort of a better understanding and a clear business plan, which then can be used to access capital from the Blue Investment Fund. So this is the link between the Blue Investment Fund and the Blue Grants Fund. I think some of you would have heard of the J curve, sort of the grants helping to enable these activities that will help with investments. So this is really the two main transactions that's really capitalizing the Blue Grants Fund at the moment. So just to give you some perspective, from the debt for nature swap, Seychelles receives $200,000 US, and from the blue bond we receive annually $500,000 US, 200,000 annually from the debt for nature swap, and 500,000 from the Blue Grants Fund. From the blue bond, sorry. So in total, annually, we aim to disperse $700,000 US from the Blue Grants Fund. So I've already mentioned about SeyCCAT, that it's independent, it's established with its own act, an act of 2015. We have a board of directors as well as advisory committees in terms of finance and grants. We aim to disperse $700,000 US per year. And we provide a sustainable flow of funds to support 5 strategic objectives, which I hope is my next slide. So moving sort of quickly on, I want to make sure we have sufficient time for discussions, but our Blue Grants Fund supports 5 strategic objectives. The first is supporting new and existing marine and coastal protected areas in sustainable use zone, very much linked to the Marine Spatial Plan. Right, so and I will speak to a few of the projects that we're currently funding. Secondly, is empowering the fisheries sector with robust science and know-how to improve governance, sustainability, value, and market options. Again, here supporting the fisheries sector, and in particular, the funds from the Blue Bond really support this strategic objective. Thirdly, promote the rehabilitation of marine and coastal habitats and ecosystems that have been degraded by local and global impacts. Fourth, develop and implement risk reduction and social resilience plans to adapt to the effects of climate change. You know, there's sort of climate adaptation in our name, right? So here is where we support climate change initiatives, particularly focused on adaptation. And finally, trialing and nurturing business models to secure the sustainable development of the Seychelles blue economy. Again, here looking at trying new business models to support the blue economy, in particular in fisheries, but where obviously there are many, because we have significant funds from the Blue Bond to deal with fisheries. It has been mainly focused on business models and fisheries. So here are a few photos, and I'm going to take stock of the time. All right, looks like it's on track. So this is a few photos from the blue projects that the Blue Grants Fund has funded. So in the corner of the screen, you would see sort of an ID chart. So we funded the first fish identification and website and database for Seychelles. And here it's up and go and running. It's called Citizens, SEATIZENENS.SC. And here you can find essentially, then you can input sort of parrotfish, and you can see the different species, but you can see their name in English, French, and Creole. You can identify whether they are regulated, what is their length and maturity. You can see references to any academic work that they have been referenced in or included, or any academic work about these species. And so this is a tool used both by fishers, communications experts, as well as academics. So it's been growing very well, and I think at the moment there's 335 species uploaded on the database. So another very interesting project was, I'm going to take some water, just a moment. Another very interesting project was piloting a novel approach, never been done before in the Seychelles, which is a voluntary fishery closure. So here we had a group of fishermen had identified an issue with trap fishery and species typically caught by trap, and they decided that they wanted to execute a fishery closure for a period of 6 months in an area, in a geographic area, in a bay that is typically frequented by some fishes. And here they executed this project. They applied for funds from us, executed the project where they educated members of the community about the importance of the closure, why it is important, why it is necessary, and they are now in the process of implementing the closure. It should reopen on the 1st of May. But in that time period, they have been collecting data before, during, and after the closure. So they should be able to indicate whether the closure has had some effect, although they are currently expressing an indication that they will do the closure every year because they don't believe that they will see impact sort of straight away in the first year, and that this needs to be a multi-year type approach. So it's very exciting that they're now taking it upon themselves and perhaps partnering with others to see how to implement this closure annually. In addition to that, we have another interesting project whereby the giant trevally is a fish that many people fly to the Seychelles to catch and take a photo with and then release. And in here, we funded a project where the proponents are trying to ascertain whether catch and release is really as harmless as we think. So they are monitoring the movements of these giant trevallies up after release. They are now sort of analyzing the data, but the preliminary results are quite interesting. There's one giant trevally, and the recatch rate is very low, but there's one giant trevally that whenever he or the individual gets caught, they leave the lagoon and they go and in I suppose a safe place behind the runway, and they stay there for a few days, and then they return to the lagoon, and they do this exact pattern of movement every time they're caught. So it's a very interesting project, but it seeks to inform whether we've got the right management policies for catch and release fishing in Alphos, which is one of our islands. We have many more projects, including mangrove rehabilitation. We have other projects linked to developing apps to try to avoid fish wastage by connecting the fisher to the customer. We have other projects involving 3D mapping of the ocean floor and starting a baseline marine biodiversity assessment to inform whether it will become a marine protected area. That area will become a marine protected area. We also have, well, at the moment we're funding 34 projects. I probably should say everybody should go on the website and check the projects out. But I'm happy to sort of explore other projects if there's other interest in terms of climate change or the business models and so on. So my last two slides are just thinking, things that we're thinking about. So another way of having a sustainable source of financing, I suppose, before COVID-19 was having a environmental fee that visitors would pay because of the impact that they would have on the environment, but also Seychelles has a significant waste management challenge. So being able to provide financing for marine protection as well as waste management. So in order to gather data to ensure that we have evidence-based policy making, we undertook a willingness to pay survey. And here we found that 80% of visitors surveyed are willing to pay an environmental fee. 20% were unwilling to pay the fee. They said it was far too expensive and the fee would make it more so. But 59%, or about 59%, were willing to pay between $10 to $40. And here is another possible financing option that the Seychelles perhaps will explore, not in the near future, but soon, or soon-ish. Finally, this is our most recent project. We're in partnership with Pew Charitable Trusts, where we will be undertaking a mapping of seagrass across the entire exclusive economic zone of Seychelles and assigning their blue carbon values. It will be both through remote sensing as well as ground truth. This is an old slide, so there's definitely going to be more than 5 sites. But then the data will be integrated into our nationally determined contribution that will be submitted at the end of the year, or towards the end of the year. So this is another innovative project. So SeyCCAT, very much partners with the government of Seychelles in terms of providing them with support to implement these innovative tools. So we've supported them through the marine spatial planning process, and now the revision and updating of their nationally determined contribution. I'll leave it there. I hope that definitely leaves sufficient time for some discussions, and happy to try and best answer all your questions.
Well, thank you very much, Angelique. That was really a thorough and fascinating presentation and overview of SeyCCAT, both from sort of recent history perspective, which of course is interesting, and then some of the activities that you're doing look really great. So I'm looking forward to hearing some of the questions that people have. Again, if you would like to ask a question, just type your question into the chat box, and then we will be able to unmute we'll just ask you to unmute your microphone, and then you can ask the question directly. But to start off, maybe I can ask you a few questions. Of course, I'm fascinated to hear more about your sort of your work around sustainable business models. But before that, I thought I'd just ask you a general question. Prior to SeyCCAT being established, Seychelles had a range of different NGOs, and of course government, activities and stuff. But what would you say is the sort of overall impact of the establishment of SeyCCAT as an independent conservation trust fund in the sort of mix of conservation in the country? In other words, what obviously having money is useful, but maybe you could expand upon that in terms of what's been the impact of having the existence of SeyCCAT.
Yeah. Okay. David, thanks for that. So I think in terms of having the existence of SeyCCAT in country, yes, the fact that we can annually provide that support and support for innovation in the country, but it's also SeyCCAT has, as I mentioned in the presentation, it's become almost a go-to place for people who are keen to invest in the Seychelles and to invest into the Seychelles and have a local partner on the ground. And I think that has been very helpful for the implementation of these financial tools, because one of the challenges that always occurs, and many donors talk about this, is the fact that yes, you get money in, and there's an absorption a limit on the ability of absorption of these funds, and this is an ongoing challenge that many donors face. But when you also have SeyCCAT in the landscape, one of the added advantage is we're here to help with capacity building. We want these funds to be accessible, and we want to deliver on inclusion, especially when we're talking about the blue economy. So one of the things that we've made sure that we do is build more capacity with regards to non-governmental organizations, but also, we are a fund that anyone can apply to as long as they're sort of Seychelles, right? So I say sort of because in business, sort of majority Seychelles. So, as long as you're a citizen of Seychelles, as long as you're a citizen of Seychelles or you're business NGO registered in Seychelles, or and you know, businesses and even government departments. So we've really acted as that bridge between the financing world and between the the implementation world, and build that capacity. So and then the other thing that we've also provided is being very targeted. So we're almost seen at, I say almost because, you know, people are still going out looking for funds themselves, other NGOs, but we are very targeted. One of the things that we're focused on, and the only organization that's focused on this, is delivering on conservation financing. So I'd say those would be my three sort of value additions to the landscape of having SeyCCAT in country.
Excellent, excellent. Great. Well, we're starting to get a few questions in, but I just want to apologize for being remiss in the beginning to just say congratulations on, you know, to Seychelles for the 30% protected area in your EEZ. It's really a spectacular accomplishment, and congratulations to you and to, of course, everyone that's been involved in that in the government of Seychelles. I think it's very ambitious and really amazing for the planet. So I just wanted to say thank you and congratulations on that. Well, I'd love to get back to hear more about the you know, sort of sustainable business models, but let's go to a couple questions here. Kamala, maybe you want to unmute yourself and ask about the fund structure, if you're able.
Yes, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
Hello. Thank you, David. Thank you, Angelique. I was a bit late, so I'm not sure if you talked about it already, but I wanted to know, what is the structure of SeyCCAT? How many people you have in your staff? What are the areas that you have as fixed staff? To have an idea of the costs that you have to run the institution?
Yeah, great question. So we have we have fixed staff of 4. Okay. But I think maybe I'll expand on that because it doesn't reflect the reality. So a fixed staff of 4. We have 1 project manager that is for marine spatial planning, but she's seconded to the Nature Conservancy. Right. So only a percentage of her time, it's about 10% of her time, is committed to SeyCCAT. Secondly, we have another project manager for this new coastal wetlands and climate change project. And again, she commits 20% of her time to 20% of her time to SeyCCAT, but she's predominantly working on this project. So really, in terms of fixed staff, just running the organization, as well as the, you know, making sure loans are paid on time, and the administration of the Blue Grants Fund, amongst other things, and strategic work. There's only 2. So the CEO, myself, as well as an executive assistant. So it's a very small operation. We depend a lot on consultancies. And one of the transactions that's involved and money that we can withhold for administration includes a percentage that can go towards strategic work. So for example, the willingness to pay survey was done by a consortium of consultants, and this was paid through the proceeds of the debt for nature swap, but for a percentage that is fixed for only strategic work.
Excellent.
And
Thank you.
perhaps just to speak to the board, we have a board of 9 people, and they represent various stakeholders.
Perfect, perfect. And Jim Tolosano, you had a question? Would you like to unmute yourself?
Sure. Hi, David. And
Hi, Jim.
yeah, I was just curious, you know, conservation trust funds work most effectively if stakeholders are excited about it too. So what sort of tools and strategy did you use in SeyCCAT to build up the awareness of the fund and get people behind it, supporting it, and engaged in it?
So this was an initial challenge, which I believe we've overcome. It's very helpful when you having a sort of a local member of staff leading the organization. That's got people very excited about the organization, very keen to partner, but also our approach when it's come to stakeholders, when it's so, and I'll take each one at a time perhaps. So when it's come to government, working with government, on our board we have 3 government officials. Of course they have to declare their conflicts of interest and so on, but we have the Minister of Environment, the Minister responsible for Finance, and the Principal Secretary responsible for Fisheries. I think it speaks for itself why they're there. There is buy-in in terms of, or that interest to support, in terms of a lot of the work done and that is being implemented through financing from SeyCCAT is supporting national priorities. So there is that element that has been very helpful to get people, to get government in particular engaged. But in terms of other stakeholders, and I want to point to small scale fishers, because that's perhaps one of the more difficult target audience to get excited about a conservation trust fund. So one of the things that we had to do is host a lot of information sessions. I have many photos of me just sitting down with the fishers whilst they're selling their fish and having that conversation with them. Obviously, it's not just about it's not just about getting information about the trust out, but getting information about how this would actually benefit them. So fishers, for example, are very focused on their short-term issues. They don't have bait, they don't have ice, but also exploring about how to enhance sustainability. Speaking to them where a lot of these project ideas really, I mean, they've got a lot of project ideas about sustainability out there in their minds, and they want to implement, or they want to add value to their products, but they're not sure how. And making sure that we also act as a bridge for other partners has made this has brought a lot of excitement and buy-in. So for example, if you've got a fisher who says, in addition to, yes, I'm part of the I'm an artisanal fisher, but I also want to help with pollution. So I also want to make sure that if I find any litter whilst I'm fishing, I'm collecting that and so on. But it has to be to an end, right? So so they want to be able to, let's say, go on and educate or create lobby government to make sure that whatever we go out at sea, we need to come back with it to shore and have these systems in place. So we are happy to help them engage with various partners who they typically would not know exist. So letting them know, like, listen, there's this NGO, they work on doing waste audits, they could help you, they could partner with you on this. This has made the people excited, and of course we have a very we have an EU standard application process on well, fortunately or unfortunately, but in any event, what we do is also have capacity building. So people are building their capacity more than just applying to SeyCCAT. They're professionally developing as well, and that's all these things come together to make people very excited about the trust fund. And I've mentioned the uptake of the fund in 2019 was moved from sort of 15 people in total. We had 49 applications and a population of 90,000 people. That's pretty good.
Excellent, thank you. We're getting quite a number of questions now, which is great. Thanks everyone for putting in your questions. I was going to go to Alexander, I'm not sure how to pronounce your last name, but Koch. Next, if you're able to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, thank you for the great presentation. Very, very interesting. So my name is Alexander Koch. I'm the director of a consultancy called Natural Strategies. I was wondering whether the green bond or the blue investment fund that you presented earlier would currently be open for any additional investments by individual investors. So individuals being interested in contributing to this, is this possible? And if so, if you could mention any eligibility criteria, is there, for example, a minimum ticket size to be able to invest there? Or are there other forms or other vehicles you're currently looking into that would seek investments from individuals if they were interested, for example, through a Nature Conservancy partnership or elsewhere? Thanks.
Thanks, Alexander. So, I mean, it's a short answer, but the answer is not at the moment. We don't have these additional investment opportunities for individual investors, and we're currently not working on something new. So I think it's something that's definitely of interest for us to do, and with the right partners, we would like to do. But at the moment, we're not working on something new.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks. And I'm just going to add very quickly to that is that Robert Weary from the Nature Conservancy is working on a series of similar types of debt swaps, debt conversions, and there's a kind of a blue bond involved, and so it would be worth keeping tabs and perhaps reaching out to Rob and the team at NatureVest, which is part of the Nature Conservancy. So they're kind of replicating this, and there may be some opportunities for investors there. I have no idea what the criteria would be or when that might be around. Angelique, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I don't know what the criteria might be and so on, but just to note that they are currently working predominantly in the Caribbean, Kenya, Mauritius, and then they're looking at a few other countries in Africa. So I think the opportunities are there. But yes, speaking to Rob Weary would be the best option for this.
Right, fantastic. Will do. Thank you so much.
Great. And then we have a question from Ivy Wong. If you want to unmute yourself, that would be great. And you can ask directly.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Angelique. Just a question. So you mentioned about 34 projects that you're implementing now. How many of that is through your local NGO partners in Seychelles, or is it with international NGO or partners or consultancy?
So all of the projects are being implemented by a local partner. Whether they're an NGO, most of them are NGOs. Others are local government departments. We also have young entrepreneurs, women associations, small-scale fishers. So sometimes it can be an individual, but they are all local. In terms of the projects themselves, quite a few of the projects are in partnership with an international partner, which is something that we encourage. Doing something like 3D mapping of the floor cannot be done in the Seychelles without that international expertise. So there are many of them that are in partnership with international partners, but they are not the main recipients of the funds, and oftentimes they just bring in-kind funding to the project, or sometimes we have really interesting arrangements where when SeyCCAT invests in a project, this is leveraged to attract more financing. And we've seen this in this 3D mapping where Blancpain Ocean Commitments came in and said, we'll match it, and they undertook this work.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Just to mention that SeyCCAT is not implementing any of the projects, right? So we're not an implementer. So the only projects that we support ourselves would be the marine spatial planning and the blue carbon assessments of the seagrass in the EEZ as well.
Perfect. Yeah, very important to point out that sort of separation of a trust fund with the actors. So we have a couple questions from Farah Ramweli. If you can unmute yourself, you can ask maybe just one of them would be good.
Yeah, thank you very much, colleagues, and thank you, Angelique, for a very good presentation. I'm Farah Ramweli from Botswana, based in Botswana rather, in charge of a basin covering 3 countries, Angola, Namibia, and Botswana. My question is actually based on the fact that we are in the process of establishing a fund ourselves. What type of organization is SeyCCAT? And this is just to tell us, so that we know that is it independent of government? You mentioned something around payment for environment and other charges that are being given. How do you get access to this, or is it you collecting them? What's happening with that kind of process? Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Thanks a lot for that question. So to your first one, we are an independent organization. We are independent of government. So I would have mentioned that we have a board of 9 people, and on the
Okay.
and of the 9 people, only 3 are government officials,
That's
right?
interesting.
And we have to declare their conflict of interest. So I mentioned the minister responsible for environment, the other one responsible for finance, and then the principal secretary for fisheries. The others are a fisher, the representative of private sector, the representative of the tourism industry, representative of civil society. So the majority of our board composition are non-governmental. And I think, you know, if it goes to a vote, it's the majority are non-governmental actors. So and then of course the Nature Conservancy sits on our board. I think that's also an interesting point to point out. So with regards to the environmental payments, so at this point in time, it's worth saying that we've only done the research about the willingness to pay, and this was done back in August of last year. Things have obviously changed drastically. We know our numbers of tourists are at 0. So in terms of what we were thinking, and this is something where we did a comparison of a comparison amongst many countries, in particular small island developing states. So the fee would be collected at the airport. And the challenge with that is the way in which the laws of the Seychelles Civil Aviation Authority is written. Any collection would go directly to the consolidated fund of government. And that poses certain issues for us. And this is why it's such a fee or levy requires a lot more work in terms of its implementation. Some people have suggested putting it at the hotel stage. I don't think it would work in Seychelles. We are quite an expensive destination if you're looking just at, you know, your accommodation industry. And operators would push back very strongly and resist very strongly on that. But if we move on now to the next stage of how do we get access to the funds, the difficult, well, to an extent, the difficulty is if you enter into an agreement with government that X amount, so $10, 300,000 tourists, $3 million goes towards the consolidated fund, and a third of that will go to SeyCCAT for marine protection. All right, so that could work, but some people have critiqued it on the basis that it doesn't give you the level of transparency in terms of getting an exact figure in terms of if there was an increase of tourism to 350,000. You've already agreed with government that you're going to get 1 million. So these are the discussions, but in terms of implementation, we have a lot more discussions to be had. But that's what we would be thinking. Collected at the airport and then somehow channeled a portion channeled directly to us rather than going through the.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Well, we have about just 4 more minutes or so, and there's about 4 more questions. I'm not sure we'll get to them, but real quickly, we'll do Benjamin Landreau and then Craig Henry. So Benjamin.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for organizing this event today, David, and thank you, Angelique, for this very inspiring presentation. And so I just had one question regarding the debt for nature swap that was negotiated in Seychelles, which is quite unique because usually debt for nature swap consists in cancelling a debt, and in your case, the idea was to renegotiate the debt. And so it was very successful because it was a long process, and it was finally negotiated nicely between all the stakeholders, but it appears that the revenue stream is of $200,000 per year, which doesn't seem to be well. It's a good amount, but it's not a huge amount, because most of the time debt for nature swap can generate millions of dollars. My question is, do you think the whole process was worth it for only $200,000? And also it's quite risky, so sometimes you can negotiate for a long time and never succeed. So would you recommend to apply the same methodology in other countries? Thank you.
No, that's a great question. I think we really need to work on a, sort of, we've got the celebration of the 30%. We've got the first cycle of SeyCCAT projects coming to fruition. I think it's really worth looking at lessons learned. But we see it every day. Was it worth it? I think it was. Also because marine protection in Seychelles is beneficial for the Seychelles economy, right? We are dependent on tourism, we're dependent on fisheries, so it works for us. Was it that it was very risky, but I think the lesson learned here is our debt for nature swap was only 21.6 million. And I think just worth saying that it wasn't always 21.6 million. It was an $80 million swap at the beginning of the discussions. It ended as a 21.6 million. As you said, you could start off with this great discussion, and then later on it either doesn't materialize or doesn't materialize as much. So that is a challenge, and I think it's worth saying that the reason why the amount went down was the fact that Seychelles was paying its debt on time, right? You're almost punished for being a good debtor. So because it was being paid on time, the creditors did not see any significance in allowing for a buyback. I mean, they were getting their money back. So lesson learned would definitely be, if you're going to have a debt for nature swap, make sure it's at scale, right? So 21.6 million, I think for future debt for nature swaps, people should definitely aim higher for multiple reasons, to make sure that you're able to meet your administration costs for the administrator, for the SeyCCAT of whichever country, because it's at a percentage of the swap. So having a bigger amount could enable us to, for example, support more staff, which is very, very much needed. But in addition to that, the expense of protecting a marine protected area of, I believe it's 410,000 square kilometers of ocean, comes at a cost. Yes, we are supporting it to an extent, but only to an extent, right? There's obviously a gap. And I think bearing in mind the costing of such commitments would be helpful in deciding whether something was worth it. For us, it's still worth it in terms that this has always been a priority. We already have done a costing of how much it would cost to protect 410,000 square kilometers, identify the gap, and we're exploring new financing mechanisms in terms of that environmental levy, for example, other increases in licensing fees to be able to meet that gap. But I think it's really a lot of factors to bear in mind for you to come out and say that, listen, this was worth it. But for us at the moment, we've seen many projects being supported by SeyCCAT. We've got the designation, and now we're focusing on making sure that this is not a paper park, and we're going to have effective management.
Excellent, thank you. Well, I'm noticing we've run out of time, but Angelique, if you're willing to stay on for a few more minutes, that would be great. And we have just a few more questions. If that works for you.
Yeah, that's fine. I can take a couple more.
Okay, great. So maybe we just do two more. This next one is from Craig Henry, if you're still on. Okay, perhaps not. I guess people have had other commitments. One more time, Craig, if you can unmute yourself, you can ask the question. If not, if Renaud is still on, Romain, you had a question as
Yes,
well?
I'm still here.
Great,
Yeah.
over to you. Okay.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you very much, Angelique. This is a great presentation. My question is, how long did it take from, I would say, the initial idea of this debt for nature swap to the first dollar available for the fund for the CTF?
4 years.
4 years. Okay, great. So that's not that long. Okay, thanks.
I think it's worth saying, you know, there's a lot of traveling in between, a lot of meetings, a lot of getting investors interested, and I think it's the resource mobilization. We even brought people down to go to Aldabra and, you know, see the environment for themselves. So it's getting the investors on board, mobilizing the resources. The Seychelles had the political will to make it happen. So on the government of Seychelles side, that was going to happen.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, I think that we'll end it there. And I just want to thank Angelique for a great presentation and really wonderful responses to questions, and encourage everyone to join the CFA's Coastal and Marine Finance Working Group to have further discussions around some of these issues. And I want to wish everyone safety and health and well-being in these difficult times. And thanks so much for joining. And Angelique, thank you so much for presenting.
Thank you very much. I hope you all.
Thank you.